Today on Secret Leaders, we're talking to Andy Coulson.
Andy Coulson, editor of tabloid newspaper News of the World, has been appointed as an advisor to Number 10.
You all at that business were super powerful, I suppose.
You think that the entire world revolves around you and what you're doing that week.
As the former editor of the News of the World, he controlled Britain's most powerful tabloid, wielding the power to build or destroy reputations with a single headline. But what makes Andy's perspective truly unique is that he's experienced crisis from both sides, from being the person who created media storms to weathering his very own, very public fall from grace, which ended with an 18-month prison sentence.
A private detective hacked into her mobile phone.
I was all over the newspapers, I was on TV.
I deeply regret it. I suspect I always will.
All this before rebuilding himself as the founder of Coulson Partners, where he now advises leaders through their darkest hours.
I was being portrayed in the way that I was being portrayed. The News of the World was being portrayed as some sort of Death Star. And that isn't the full truth.
This episode is a masterclass in crisis management, reputation building, and the art of the comeback. Andy Coulson, welcome to Secret Leaders.
Thanks very much, guys. Great to be here.
Thanks for coming on.
So usually when someone steps into your office, they're going through a crisis. They're in the middle of a crisis. You know, that's not the... You walked into our office and we were eating lunch. So felt, from a professional point of view, it felt a bit like a crisis. We're like, God, he's not going to be very impressed with us too, is he?
All good.
But,
gave me a chance to go and get a sandwich.
Yeah, exactly. We solved each other's crisis of hunger. But so when someone does that, you know, what are the first steps that you do with that person? You know, do they come in a certain kind of frenetic energy or what? How do you handle that first meeting with them?
I ask them how they are. And on a level, you'd say, well, that's platitude. But actually, it's the most important, useful, strategic question you can ask if you're going to be able to build the trust quick enough to get the honest answer. How are you? Because I can build you a plan. I can devise a strategy. I can come up with all sorts of smart ideas. And it might be if you are in the wrong place in terms of where your head is, where your health might be, mental and otherwise, that is all going to be useless. So, you know, I think there's a sort of slight misconception about crisis management in a way, in that it's all about the output, it's all about the statement, or it's all about the clip that you give to the news if it's something very high profile, or it's the, I need to react, right, which is a natural response when you're in crisis, right? It's almost chemical. But we try to look at it and start from the other end. And for me, it's all about the individual and where they are, what their mindset is. And then the second question is, what is it that you're looking to achieve here? And if what you're looking to achieve is simply make it all go away, then that can often be an interesting and perhaps quite difficult conversation. Because if you take that sort of silver bullet approach to a problem, very, very few problems are solved with one silver bullet. It's just not how it is. And then, where is it that we're trying to get to long term? And we take very much a long term view of crisis management. Who are you? Where are you? What is it that you want to achieve? What's in the way? Aside from this problem, actually, what is it that you want to be, either as an individual or as a business? It's the same question. And then finally, I think it's it's a culture question for me, with a business in particular, because I think that there is often, not always, I think if it's a health crisis, right, there's no opportunity there necessarily. But serious illness aside, I think there's invariably opportunity in crisis. Certainly was for me, and I've had a bit of it in my life, as I'm sure we'll discuss. I think a crisis offers the opportunity for a proper audit on your life, a proper chance to stop, pause, analyze your values, really think about who you are and what it is you want in your life, define your purpose, and then off you go.
It's very common. What you've just described is almost the exact hero's journey, isn't it? Very commonly entrepreneurial journeys too, right? They start because of a low moment where you realized enough was enough of X thing and I had to find a different way.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Entrepreneurs are interesting when in crisis. We work with a lot of disruptors, if you like, and it's a difficult, often, not always, but often a difficult thing to come to terms with as an entrepreneur, because invariably, if you've been successful, you've done it your way. You've done it by doing things differently. You've done it by just kind of running against the common approach. What's made you successful is being different, right? And so when you find yourself in a problem, and it might be often is a cultural problem where you've raced ahead, built your business, but you've just not got that culture aligned behind you. You're sort of slightly offended, right? You're kind of what? You know, I've built this amazing business, and now suddenly people have got the audacity to ask me, you know, tough questions about my culture, about me, about my style of leadership. We've seen this in some very big businesses, right? You know, some epic businesses, and that's what it is. It's a cultural lag between leader and the team, and you know, that is interesting work. Trying to get those two things back aligned, and that requires counselling in a way. And I do a lot. I think that's a lot of what we do is trying to get an entrepreneur in those circumstances to appreciate that they've built an amazing business, but the world has changed and their world has changed.
So at the beginning of a crisis, first 60 minutes, the first couple of days, like what are the big mistakes that people make?
I think the rushing to, you know, which is a natural response, right? When you're in danger, you want to do something about it.
Especially entrepreneurs, right?
Keep them away from Twitter.
Yeah, it's fight or flight, and it's there's something I can do here, and it's, as I say, particularly if you're a successful person who has has got agency and has always had agency in the way that they've built their business, they've got control. Trying to have that conversation, which is the first conversation, you know, beyond how are you, is trying to work out, you know, with the client, what do you have control of and what don't you have control of? Right, you guys have talked about stoicism on this pod. I actually see that you've got Darren Brown's book.
It's excellent.
It's excellent book.
Excellent. So good.
Excellent introduction to stoicism.
Yeah, it is. Not many people know about that book either. I always recommend it to people.
No, it's
and they're
terrific.
like, I don't know.
No,
it's
terrific.
so good.
Yeah, you know, and it is a superb introduction to stoicism. You know, which I'm a fan of. You know, that's the central tenet of stoicism, right? Is work out what you've got control of and what you don't have control of, and then concentrate on the things that you have control of. It's often understood in that people see stoicism quite often as being unemotional.
Yeah, or detached.
Or detached. I think it's the reverse. I think once you've worked out what you've got control of and what you don't, that's where you then put all your emotion.
Yeah, and your
energy. Is that outcome focused at the beginning of the crisis? You're saying you can control X, you can control Y. This is where we want to get to, or is that too early? There's
two things obviously are aligned. The way to get to your outcome, in my view, first and foremost, is about control and obviously about acceptance. You know, that, well, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of, you know, that often being a challenge with entrepreneurs, is just, yes, it's real. It's real. And also sometimes, you know, is, you know, and I've found myself in this situation with clients, you know, quite often where I'm able to say pretty quickly, you're not in crisis. You've got a serious problem, right? And we need to navigate that and manage that, but you're not in crisis. Let's take the temperature down. And crisis, you know, is a word that's overused. I overuse it. It's it's in my
twice in 3 words. Yeah. Twice in 3 words in a title.
Also on brand.
Exactly. So it is overused, and you know, I'm part of that problem.
But how would you define the difference between a crisis and a problem?
A crisis for me is if your life, if the purpose of your life has been, you've properly lost control of it, right? You've lost grip of the direction of your life, and I think also, you know, your values are being questioned. Yeah, fundamentally, then you're in crisis. Right? There's a lot of stuff that sits under the current bracketing of crisis, I think.
So a reputation, famously, takes years to build, minutes to lose. Obviously, you've had that context yourself in your own life. So for the audience that don't know, what do you know about reputation management and crisis, dealing with crisis?
Well, I know it from a number of different angles. You know, poacher, gamekeeper, game. So, you know, poacher, you know, I was a newspaper editor for a number of years. That ended very badly. Gamekeeper, you know, I suppose describes my time as an advisor, you know, working with David Cameron, where, you know, my job really was to be the, you know, part of the Praetorian Guard, if you like, around his reputation and around the party's reputation. And then game is, you know, the 5 years I spent dealing with my own issues. Which were very high profile, you know, front and center of the media for long periods of time. You know, a spell in prison, and then actually coming out of prison and going into another trial, which fortunately I was acquitted in, and then the rebuild, which is, I'm now 7 years into. I actually came out of prison almost exactly 10 years ago.
Wow.
But as I say, I had that other issue to deal with first. And so, my business now is 7 years old. And my life now actually is, this is interesting. I think you'll be the judge around reputation. I think when you've failed, or particularly if you've done so publicly, which was the case for me, you've got a decision to make. You can either try and put that in a box and, reinvent and sort of, that happened. Let's just push it to one side, find a new way forward. Or, and this is, where I am on it, I think that's unhealthy. I think what you should do is confront your failures, accept them. Don't be defined by them. I don't think I am defined by and I certainly don't live my life on the basis that I'm defined by my failures, but I will never forget them. I mean, in my cases, I suppose, did I have much choice? It's a fair question because it was so public, but I think I did. I think I could have not called my business Coulson Partners. I could have named it after a London square like most consultancies, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted my name over the door because I wanted everyone to know it's me. Right?
It's probably quite good marketing at that point.
Well, it's binary. was the view.
Yeah. If someone comes to
it
you,
either is or it isn't.
like,
I
you've
don't
been
know.
through it.
But I tell you what, it is efficient. It's super efficient. And and more than that, I really, in a very front foot way, because I believe it to be true, I put my experience to good use. I think if you've got a problem, or if you've got an unrealized opportunity, which is actually what we spend most of our time doing rather than crisis management. Crisis management is a part of what we do. We are, we're positive reputation builders, right? And having someone who's lost one in the room can be really useful, right? If you're from a positive perspective, let alone, he must know how to avoid these problems. Which I have some views on. And so that's the professional bit, but also the other bit of my life is if you'll forgive the plug, is my podcast, right? Where I talk to people who've been through crisis, and those are my little arrows out in the world for free. It's all there. Go find it. It's all yours if you want it. Where people have been through far worse than me, by the way, are giving their lessons on how to get through crisis, and I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I love that. That is meaningful, and that is useful. I think I'll do it for as long as it's useful. And so to have a life now, having had some bumps in the road, where I can put all of my experience to good use, commercially in my business, and then in the way that I am in my pod, it's just delightful. I've never been happier. Is the truth of it.
What do you think your retation is for people that
That's
don't know?
a brilliant question. That is a brilliant question. I do not know the answer to that.
Really?
Because that's an interesting thing. Because and I.
It's funny because it just came to me as we were talking, and I'm like, I wonder what it broadly is.
No,
it's
a great question. Because what's the measure of it? You know, and I suppose of course I am concerned about my reputation from a commercial point of view, and I think we've got a growing, because my business is not just about me, by the way. I've got brilliant partners, John Stiefel, Katie Searle. These are very, very experienced people, as well as a good team. So, I hesitate to associate only myself with the reputation of my business, because I'm lucky enough to work with brilliant people who are contributing to that. And I think we've got a very good reputation in the marketplace now.
Yeah, as a company.
I've done it for 7 years, as a company. My personal reputation, I think, thanks to the joys of the Google algorithm, I suspect still remain pretty mixed. Right. One of the things about the Google algorithm is that it will take something from a piece of coverage from 2010 and stick it in the first page of your news search as if it happened yesterday. I am not the poster boy to start complaining about that, by the way. But it is like having a newspaper posted through your front door, 10 years after a court case. Yeah. As if it's real. So that, I think, is an element, I suppose, on my digital reputation. But what sits below it for me, and this is another, this is linked to control, this is definitely linked to stoicism, is that I have also worked out, and it took me a while, that the only opinions really that are my business are the opinions of my family, my wife first and foremost, and my 3 sons, of my friends that I care about, and of the clients that who choose, for which I'm incredibly grateful, to work with us. Those are the opinions I care about. Anyone else's opinion of me, and I don't want this to sound arrogant, is none of my business. It is for whoever has that opinion. And I know that will always be people who have a certain opinion about me, and there's nothing I can do about it, control. And actually, it's for you. Mm-hmm. And that is a very freeing position to find yourself in. And, and if I can get, in the process that we go through with our clients, if I can get my clients to that place as well, that's a very useful thing to be able to get to.
Can you tell us about what it really feels like when you're being cancelled?
Well, for me,
give us some flavour on that.
Yeah, it was wretched, and I use the word unravelling, and that's what it felt like for me. The first year in particular was just terrible because everything, sort of fell in. I was unemployable. The kind of economic impact on that on me and my family was pretty immediate. I was, all over the newspapers. I was on TV, being, portrayed as someone that I didn't think and don't think I was, or that I am, and that is a very difficult thing to live with. And then there's your relationships, thankfully, the important relationships in my life, most importantly with my wife, were rock solid. But, it's a real test of friendship. It's a real test of your professional relationships. There were, I have to say, ultimately, over the longer term, massively net positive for me. Far more people ran towards me who owed me nothing than people who I felt perhaps did owe me a bit, at least some loyalty, ran in the opposite direction. But I also learned that, my situation was a scandal, right? And scandal can really twist a lot of things out of shape. It can twist friendships out of shape. It can twist professional relationships. It just bends things out of shape. And if you can accept that as well, and just sort of see it for what it is, that really helps with the anger and most importantly the bitterness. So I was pretty bitter for about a year, and then I worked it out. And bitterness is is the end. Is the truth.
The coverage was like very significant, very regular.
Yeah.
Were you seeing that?
Oh, can I say, by the way,
yeah.
I do not want any of this to come over as woe is me. Right? I just don't believe that. Right? I think I think there is nothing more useless in life than a self-appointed victim. And I'm not that, and I'm not looking for a round of applause But presumably, particularly when it comes to the media coverage, I think it would be grossly hypocritical of me to whinge and moan.
I'm more like,
right?
what was it? How regular did it feel to you in the moment?
At times it was. There were periods of my life where it was every day. And it's a different problem. Because it was so multifaceted.
Managing international money used to drive me crazy. Until I found Wise Business, the account for doing business in other currencies. I can hold money in different currencies and only convert when the rates are good. No more rushing to exchange at bad rates or losing money on outrageous fees. And my team handles all the payments themselves. I don't have to micromanage anything. They have their own logins, set their own limits, and I just keep an eye on things from my phone. One simple account lets you pay and get paid in over 40 currencies. There's no hidden fees, no marked up exchange rates, and it connects right to your accounting software. Whether you're paying vendors or suppliers in Europe or you're getting paid from Australia, it's all just easy. And that's what I love about Wise. It just takes this complicated thing and it makes it really simple. Your money's always secure with 24/7 protection, and you can see exactly where everything is in real time. To learn more about how you can use Wise Business to save time, money, and stress, visit wise.com/business.
And the difficult thing, obviously, is not just the impact on me; it's the impact on the kids and Eloise, and having to move and all the kind of impact that it had on our life. That obviously was very painful and very difficult. And bear in mind, I was in a period of my life. I was in my early 40s. I was firing on all cylinders. That's the period of your life when you should be at your most productive. And so
it's probably made you now, right? As in, like, your success now is the kind of the end, like you said, the sort of his hero journey. As in, you're now probably viewed as the reputation specialist because of this arc that you've gone through.
Well, I hesitate to say it's made me. I mean, the interesting thing is, I'm definitely happier for it. I'm definitely a better advisor. Much more importantly, I'm a better husband. I'm a better father. I'm a better friend as a result of it, without any shadow of a doubt on all of that. But I can't honestly sit here and say I'm glad it happened.
No.
I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I do not wish it to happen.
And
do not wish it to happen.
Do you feel like going through that experience, well, different actually, going through that experience, did that help you reflect on your time as editor at News of the World, where ultimately you were responsible for doing that to other people, not in necessarily the obvious malicious way, but that is essentially the job of the editor of the News of the World, whoever takes that role.
It's part of the job.
Part of the job,
yeah.
not the only job.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's other aspects to it, but did it make you reflective at the time?
Of course it did. And it's an interesting thing for me because, of course, it was so negative. All of it was so negative. I was being portrayed in the way that I was being portrayed. The News of the World was being portrayed as some sort of Death Star. And that isn't the full truth. Lots of mistakes made. I was the boss. That's why I absolutely feel a sense of responsibility over what happened. And I feel very sorry about it, and why I will now take this opportunity to apologise to anyone who's listening who was impacted by it. But it's not the full truth, the entire truth of the News of the World. The entire truth of the News of the World is quite different. And I know that because I was there. And it was actually a place populated by very professional people in the main, who would turn up to work to produce a brilliant product that was loved by its readers, and that was as much about humour and sport and campaigning and sort of journalistic brilliance that does not fit with the caricature of the paper now. And I feel terribly sorry for those people, because of course the paper was closed. Not my decision, but it was closed. So, where I am on it now is, it has taken me a long while, is that I'm now able to say that to you in a way that doesn't kind of, cause me to think, oh my God, I'm trying to defend the News of the World. It's just the truth of the place. And it also is kind of the truth of me, right? I'm someone who's made loads of mistakes in my life, loads of mistakes, professional and personal. I really do believe, as a result of, I think, what I went through, that I've got something to contribute, and that I've got something that's useful, and that's how I'm going to focus the rest of my life on, is trying to do something productive, try and build a brilliant business. The people that I've always admired in life are people who've got off their backside, people like yourselves who've gone out and built something. I was only ever an employee until I wasn't. And so, that's what I'm going to do with the business. And if I can also, as I say, fire a few of those arrows out through the pod, happy days.
I suppose in that role and in that life, you all at that business were super powerful, I suppose, as in like your power over the media.
Influential,
yeah. Do you think at any point with the mistakes that was made, that was because you all felt so influential and
definitely an element of it. Definitely an element of that.
Does it go to your head whether you like it or not?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's like it or not. I mean, there's I've sort of mentioned this, previously, but there's a condition called editoritis, which is little known. Editoritis,
right?
I was definitely a sufferer of editoritis, and the main symptom is that you think that the entire world revolves around you and what you're doing that week, and there was definitely a bit of that.
I think Piers Morgan still suffers from this.
That's my responsibility, right? Because I was the boss, but it wasn't the only thing that was going on at the News of the World. There was also an awful lot of humour. There's an awful lot of kind of, we were very self-effacing in lots of ways as well. But yeah, I wouldn't use the word. I don't think I'd strutted around believing myself to be powerful.
Yeah.
I don't think I would use that word, but I think I would use the word strutting around thinking we're influential. And to an extent we were, right? But I think that there was too much of that. There was, on reflection, too much of that.
So on reflection, what are, I suppose, the biggest regret from that period of time?
Well, the biggest regret is my failure of leadership,
with the team.
And also that I didn't really, what a thing to be the editor of a newspaper like the News of the World, right? At that time, with its influence, with its ability to kind of, bring change, whether it's policy change or whether it's impacting, other areas that we were interested in. And we did some good work on that. We didn't, it wasn't all scandal and doom and gloom by any measure. We did some things that were quite different as well. I got William Hague as a columnist for the News of the World. Quite unusual. A lot of people, what was that about? Well, William Hague's turned out to be a pretty good newspaper columnist. The way we approached the sports coverage was very different to a lot of other newspapers. We were pretty innovative, but not innovative enough. And that's one of my regrets, is that I didn't put it to work more positively. I could have done so much more with it, I now realise. But, I was quite young, and this is not an excuse, but it's just the truth. I'm not sure I was ready for it. Certainly wasn't trained. There's no training going on. And I don't think I was. If you'd asked me then, are you ready? Of course, raring to go. If you asked me then, are you too immature to be the editor of the News of the World? I would have been mortally offended.
Editoritis would have set in.
Editoritis would have set in. I would have told you to jog on. But now I can see, actually, in lots of ways, I don't think I was ready for it.
You manage communications, obviously, for News of the World and also the government at Downing Street. So what are your top 3 tips for managing a reputation?
Well, I think the first one we've already talked about is work out what you mean by reputation, right? Because if what you mean by reputation is fame, that's the wrong approach, and I'm certainly not the man to advise you. If, however, you're super clear that I want a reputation for this purpose, either to build a brilliant business or to get into power in the context of politics because I want to do these things, then that's got to be the first point to arrive to, right? Really work hard at defining where it is you want to be and who it is you want to be. Number one. And then number 2, I think it comes back to the control piece again, right? The second thing is, right, what have I got control of to make that happen? We've talked about control in the context of crisis, but control is very important from a positive point of view when you're trying to frame your reputation or build your reputation. What have I got control of that will affect that and impact that, and what don't I? And I think people often go running off into directions thinking this is going to somehow support, drive, help build my reputation. Is the wrong place to be. So be super sort of strategic about where you're going to put your reputation effort. And then the third thing I think is all about sort of preparation for when it might go wrong. And a lot of the work that I do is frustrating in a way, because you're sitting with a client and you think, if only you'd sat and had this conversation with me a year ago. If only you'd sort of, just taken the time to put reputation is not so often. It's just not at the in the boardroom, right? No, it's not at the table. It's PR. Not every
you sort of feel like it will just sort itself out as long as you just do the right things, which is probably a bit casual.
Not a problem till it's a problem, right?
Yeah, some firms have gone as far as having a sort of chief reputation officer.
Really?
There are a few, but it's very, very rare. It's normally in it might be in the public affairs bucket. It might be in, depending on what kind of business you are. It might be in the comms bucket. It might even be in the sort of internal comms bucket. I see that all the time when internal, external comms are mixed up. But reputation as a word is so rarely brought into the conversation at board level. And I think it's partly because of this, or it partly speaks to the problem that we have with reputation, is that it is invariably seen through a negative prism. It is invariably seen as sort of dark arts or spin or PR in its broader sense, or it's manipulative, or it's slightly deceitful, right? That's where reputation lives. And I think that's entirely the wrong place for it. I think, trying to carve out, drive, maintain, protect your reputation is a wholly positive enterprise. It should be embraced. Leaders should talk about it. But no one wants to talk about their reputation because they feel like they're spinning.
You've been at the centre of some of the biggest sort of media storms in the UK, both professionally and then politically as well. What are the patterns you see from good leaders at managing that? What are the things that you're seeing from people who are brilliant at managing crisis?
Well, they get the control thing first and foremost. They are quick enough to appreciate and understand and accept that there's a proper problem or a crisis that they need to deal with, and obviously they're able to take their teams with them through crisis, which is not always a given with a leader, and that is about getting the right people in the room, making sure the wrong people are out of the room. Which is often quite tricky. That's tricky in politics. It's certainly tricky in business, because quite often the people that are, I think, causing problems in those situations, in those rooms, because in the end that's what it comes down to, a bunch of people in a room, right, trying to work through a problem. Quite often it's people with the skin in the game who are raising the temperature, who are causing division with their views, who are steering you off in a different direction. And that's where the value, without wishing to, promote the value of independent advisors, but that's why you want independent advisors. Because I go into a room, I've got no skin in the game whatsoever. I will just tell you what I think you need to know, and I do it on the basis. This is the premise of the way that we engage with clients. I do it on the basis that I am not telling you that I am always going to get it right, because by the way, I'm a human being, but I will be right more than I'm wrong. That's my approach, and I think a good leader will allow their team, whether it involves independence or not, to have that space to get things wrong. That's how you work through a problem, and that's how you get to a solution. So those are the leaders, I think, who do a good job. David Cameron, who I worked for, as you know, he was good in a crisis precisely for that reason.
He was very, very good communicator.
Good communicator, but good communicator with his team, and he gave us room to make mistakes. But we all knew as a result that what the mission was, what it was we were trying to achieve. And he set, I was thinking about this the other day. He set a very modest kind of mission, really, in a way. But one of the reasons he had so much loyalty around him was because it was it's seemingly modest, but very, very effective. And there was an argument. I didn't see him lose his temper much, but he lost his temper once when we were having a conversation. Others in the team felt that we needed to define what Cameronism was. And he lost his rag because he said, I don't want an ism. I'm not an ism. This is not about an ism. This is just about leaving the country in a better state than we found it. That's what we're doing here. It's a great moment, actually. It's very early on in my relationship with him, and I just thought, yeah, I like that. That will do for me. That was a terrific bit of leadership.
What would you say are the three things that can destroy a reputation?
What three things that are more likely to mean when a problem comes you're going to destroy your reputation, or do you mean a specific problem that is undoable or unsolvable?
Probably the former. Well, actually, they're both interesting, frankly.
I think that I think if you're on the wrong end of a certain type of criminal offence, it's very difficult. Depending on who you were, what it is you wanted to do the rest of your life. That's very difficult. I think if you're, it's a good question. I think politically, we're seeing it with Donald Trump. We've just touched on it. Not much that seems to have kind of undone him at all. And there are a number of things that he's
what would you pin down on
dealt with, which if we were having this conversation, 3 years ago, you'd have said, well, that would do for him.
All of it, yeah.
How many people said, well, that will do for him?
Totally.
He can't possibly survive that.
So many of those.
Survive that. So that does send a signal to you that actually there's not much that you can't find some sort of solution to.
Sounds absurd to say these words, but the grab the pussy moment was probably the defining moment of nothing is ever going to stop this guy.
Do you remember the rebrand of that? Do you remember it was actually... No. I'm not saying I agree with it, but the rebrand of that statement was genius. Do you remember it?
No, what was it?
They managed to rebrand it in the press as it's locker room talk. And the whole fan base was like, yeah, it's just locker room talk. Huh. And I remember being like, fucking hell, is that amazing political spin that someone's been like, we have to take the weight out of it. We have to take the weight out of the statement, and we have to, make people understand that any of us could have said that.
He's obviously
genius.
He's obviously probably done and said worse things, like actually being convicted of stuff. That's pretty.
That's more significant.
Yes, it is. It is. But I think from that moment, you realised that nothing was going to stop his voters from voting for him. It's more of that, right?
I'll tell you the other thing that's sort of changed. I think in terms of there's a lot of disadvantages with the way that the media has now worked from a reputation point of view. There are some advantages. Right, one of those advantages is sort of short memory syndrome. Yeah. We do move on very quickly now. Yeah. So if I were to ask you to remember the name of the person who tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan, right, John Hinckley Jr., is pretty fixed. Particularly people in my generation. I'm older than you guys, right? That name's fixed. How many of us can remember immediately and recall the name of the guy who was laid out on that roof with a rifle who tried to kill Donald Trump?
Great point.
It's gone, right?
Great point.
Thomas Matthews. Crooks, I think his name was.
That's right, yeah.
Thomas Matthew Crooks.
Yeah.
Gone. And that these are two people who try to kill a president of the United States.
And probably the most famous of all, Lee Harvey Oswald, because it's the furthest back. Want to know what kills big deals faster than anything? Security compliance. Honestly, it's a headache, and I don't know anyone who likes doing it. But there is a solution. One that makes security compliance easy. Vanta. Think of Vanta as your compliance wizard. They automate everything for SOC 2 and ISO 27001, turning complex security requirements into a simple, streamlined process. Over 8,000 companies, from startups to giants, trust Vanta to handle their compliance. Use Vanta so you don't get slowed down by security paperwork and focus on what matters, growing your business. Visit vanta.com/secret leaders now and get $1,000 off your first year.
But this stuff just kind of
Evaporates.
fritters away in a way that it didn't used to. So that could tell you, if you find yourself in a truly tricky situation, those two things. Well, Donald Trump ended up as president. No one can remember the person who tried to kill him. That could point you in a direction to say, actually, there's nothing that's unsolvable. There's nothing that's undoable. I'm not sure. I do, however, come back to, and we discussed this idea of whether Donald Trump's happy. He's undeniably thrilled. But, the clients that I'm working with, aren't seeking to be the president of the United States. They're just trying to lead productive, successful lives. And so the happy question is a very important question. Yeah. It's a really important question. And what do you want to end up with, at the end of all this? And it's a question I asked myself when I was in the middle of my stuff. That's when I sort of had my little mini epiphany about how I was going to handle it. Sat on a mattress in a cell in a Glasgow police station. Totally lost control of my life. My life had become completely absurd. And I just, you've lost control, Andy. And so, breathe in, breathe out, and just keep doing those two things. And one day you'll be doing it somewhere an awful lot better with your family and with the people that you love. And then you'll be in a position to work out who you want to be, what you want the rest of your life to be.
For the sake of like our audience and for advice for our audience. So you had obviously the newsjacking scandal, you had prison, you had this effective comeback journey. And I think a huge part of that is rebuilding your trust with companies and individuals. So if someone is going through a crisis, has had a crisis, how do they begin the trust build? Because for you, you just said, you did hit rock bottom and you did acknowledge the problems, and you said you did say sorry. So you knew on that mattress in that moment, you were like, well, there's a rebuild coming. Yeah. Like, how does it start?
It's really difficult. It was really difficult because I'm going out into the world understanding that for the previous 5 years, there was a particular view of me that was pretty well fixed, right? And so I'm walking into rooms with people trying to convince them that they need my help. With all that still, I used to sort of see it as kind of, rocks in my rucksack, still feeling the weight of that in every conversation. But, I was able to, even in those early days of building the business, I knew I was valuable. I knew I had something of use. I didn't know how far I'd get with it, and I didn't know whether or not people would agree with me, but I knew enough. I had enough confidence about that to be able to walk through the door and have those conversations, and then you win one, right? So I don't talk about my clients, but I do talk about this guy. He's a former client now, but a friend of mine, a guy called John Roberts, who's the founder of a business called AO.com. And John and I met and went up to go and see him in Bolton, where AO's based. And we had a conversation. We've been introduced, and he said, "Look, I'm going back to London. Why don't you jump on the train with me?" He said, and as we got on the train, he said, "Right, you've got the time of this journey to convince me why I need you in my life." Great challenge.
How long was the train?
But also terrifying, right? This was quite a big deal for me, right? This is a proper business, publicly listed firm, fantastic business that John had built, and I was pitching to give them advice. And we got to the end of the journey, and he said, "Great, we're on."
It's a great story.
Good job. And that was a big step for me, right? And then each time you you win a piece of business and someone says, yeah, I need you. It's more wind in your sails and off you go again. But I'm not going to tell you it's been a straight road, because it hasn't, right? Because it's also been pretty tricky at times.
But on a practical level, though, how do you advise people to rebuild trust? Because obviously you've done it yourself and you're still in the process of it always, every day, every pitch.
Yeah.
But what about the advice you give to other people, or to entrepreneurs? To entrepreneurs that are listening, that have lost the trust of their team, maybe their investors. What is the advice you give to them?
It's integrity is the best armory, right? It all starts with that. So work out who you are and make sure you communicate that clearly, and stay true, stay consistent, stay authentic. I think authentic is a word that gets warped left, right, and centre. I hear people talking about Trump as being authentic. He's authentically inauthentic, but it's definitely worked for him. But you know what I mean? It's kind of got warped. The single most important thing comes back: who are you? What is it you're trying to achieve? And then communicate it. And from a staffing point of view, you just got to have that. You've got to stay consistent. You cannot waver from it, in my view, with your team. I certainly aim for that with mine. This is what we're trying to achieve, and this is how we're going to do it.
But sometimes the trust has been lost because you have come across inauthentic to your integrity, to your values, to the things that you think that you are and that other people do. So when that happens, then what? Because I agree with you. The easiest Teflon here is to not be a prick and to be a great person, have integrity and all the things. But in business, sometimes, sadly,
funnily enough, the kind of not being a prick bit. There's lots of versions of that, right? Because being a prick could also be that you're
being authentic. Yeah.
Well, it can be authentic. Can be quite useful. It's the truth of you.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean about those conversations with clients where you're trying to work out, get that that trust bit working. And
but for the ones where that has actually wavered, that baseline, whatever it is, you're right. Yeah. Whatever the actual authentic, integrity bit is, if you've made a mistake with that core piece, then what?
Well, then you work to see how you can repair that, and that might well involve a moment. Right, whether that is a statement, if it's a public situation, or whether it is a kind of part mea culpa to your team if it's an internal issue, or whether it's you having to change your behaviours and to find ways of demonstrating that. You just got to you got to get to the truth of the person to even begin to be able to kind of repair it.
Whenever I get asked, I would definitely not say I'm a crisis specialist at all, but whenever I get asked that question by other entrepreneurs, I always have said, and I've been sitting here thinking about it, I've always said, like, the first thing you should probably try and do is acknowledge where you've gone wrong, apologize for the part of it that you've got wrong, and lay out a plan of how you're going to get back to a version that is good.
Yes.
And so is apologizing a big part of trust build?
It can be, but I've seen plenty of apologies that you just know are completely inauthentic. Right. There's a phrase in comms that still lives, kind of still got plenty of life in it, and I still see politicians in particular using it, saying, I don't recognize that version of events. What the fuck does that mean?
I don't recognize that version
I don't recognize that version of events. And then it'll lead to, however, what
do they mean by
I'm
that?
sorry. Well,
that's your view, mine's different.
Right.
What that means is I don't want to answer the bloody question. Essentially, is what it means.
Yeah. Okay.
But if and also an apology has got to be. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be authentic, and you've got to be able to evidence it. Apologizing in itself is not enough. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you mean it, and that might take a bit of time. That might mean that you shouldn't apologize immediately. It might mean actually you should get things in order first, before you start, before you run out and start saying sorry. Timing is very, very important in the reputational rebuild.
Yeah, I think especially in the context of teams. So the reason I would always say, like, plan out the structural approach to how you're going to fix your problem with your team first, then say sorry, then deliver the plan, because otherwise you can just be like, I'm sorry for being a dick, and then say, like, here's my 7-point plan to encompass everything that you've fed back, and this is where I'm going to change.
Exactly.
And I think people like to see the acknowledgement and the specifically pointing to problems.
They do, but they want to know that you mean it.
Yeah.
And that is, that may take some time.
You've been through obviously quite a public crisis, as we discussed, and going to prison coming back. You said, there are certain things that you can't recover a reputation from. The first thing you said was going to prison. And here you are running
for certain offences.
Yeah. You shouldn't have murdered all those people, though. But for the reputation point of view, sorry, childish, I know. But for the reputation point of view of you're back running a business, and it's obviously growing, and you've got people lining up to work with you, and you're hosting a podcast on crisis, etc. What is your belief in reinvention? Then is all of this like a conscious reinvention plan? Like, for example, spend time in prison thinking about it?
I don't see it as reinvention for the reason that I explained earlier. If I were reinventing, I would not be sat here talking about my failures, right? I would be avoiding this conversation.
Right.
Yeah. Right. I would absolutely not want to be here with you.
Right. So this is evolution, not reinvention.
Totally.
Right. Okay.
Right. And it's who I am now.
So do you believe in reinvention for some of your clients, though?
I'm not a massive fan of reinvention. I am a fan of evolution and carrying your issues with you, and I think you get an awful lot more permission, particularly if you've made mistakes. This is certainly the view of my own life. If I sat here now and just tried to sort of brush them off, I think that would be entirely inauthentic. It's not who I am. It's not how I feel. And I think failure is good. I think it's part of being a human being. I don't think that means that it's not significant or that I shouldn't be criticized for it. I think it was significant, and I think I should be criticized for it. But as I say, we got to it earlier, I don't think that should stop me or anyone else, for that matter, from being able to see whether or not they've got something productive to offer as they go forward. Isn't that what
Yeah.
being a human being is all about?
Can we get you to work through a live case study of a crisis? It's just come to me.
Yeah.
But how would you solve P. Diddy's current crisis?
It's much too early to say whether or not it's solvable, because we just don't know the facts yet. But certainly,
wild.
It's shaping up to be one of the most interesting crises.
Very interesting. And certainly you can see that there are people rushing to kind of, trying to block off certain avenues on it, which is going to end up being as much of the story as the offences themselves.
Is that reputation savable?
I don't know. In truth, I just don't. I haven't paid enough attention to it to be able to say. And I don't think we yet know, do we?
No.
The full truth. So it is live.
It's feeling damning, but we don't know.
We just don't know yet.
We had James Watts on the podcast the other week from Brewdog.
Yes.
Do you know him?
Yes.
Were you aware of the fact that publicly he got quite cancelled?
Yes.
Because of his team and their feedback, and there was an open letter about him.
Yes.
And it ended up being quite a big thing in the press, and he did then get cancelled basically for a period of time. He's then fought them and so forth. But what would your advice what would your advice have been to him at the time? Because that was quite a nuanced case.
That was an interesting case study, because I think the attitude and the approach that James took was to sort of lean into it, was to talk about himself, talk about his mental health, talk about some of the issues he's had over the years, and to confront the reality of what that meant, both as an entrepreneur, but also as a businessman who was carrying all that through his career. And I think that was the right approach. I seem to remember he wrote a very long kind of explanation of his management style on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean he is. He said to us on the pod that he had just finished a case. Putting right his reputation, I think, with the BBC.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's such a nuanced issue. I'm sure that in many regards, like, he probably was a very heavy-handed boss in a startup, driving a startup, etc.
I mean, you're a Scottish fisherman boat building like one of the fastest growing brands in the world. Like, you can't have it every which way. You can't build such a great brand and everything just will be placid and calm. And Ted does take a mercurial boss.
Nicola from
The Ordinary. She did.
Yeah, I don't know if you have to be like that to run a great company, but I think there's always nuance to all of it, right?
I think a lot of it also is pace, though.
Yeah.
They grew fast, and you need certain types of people, and you need certain types of leadership to get you.
There's three sides of a story. There'll be like their side, his side, and then
Andy
the truth
Coulson's
will
side.
sit somewhere in the middle. I
think they were also pretty punchy with their comms and with their marketing,
totally,
and with their stunts.
Yeah, they put their head above the parapet.
Pretty punchy stuff. Yeah. That you might say kind of might have tilted the media in a
if you wind up the media and they get them on your back,
also,
then you're
the
screwed.
media build you up and then tear you down. It's part and parcel of the, like, any entrepreneur that I see getting built up. I'm always like, when's the come down? Like, even Tom Blomfield, do you remember? he had such a like, I know Tom really well, and he wouldn't mind me saying this, but he had such a fantastic media rise, and then fraud went up in digital banking because it was so much easier to defraud the digital banks than it was the traditional banks, and he just got labelled as like the reason that was happening, which was so unfair, but it just tore him down. And then he now is like kind of not really that focused on press ever.
Yeah, and he also left the UK for the Silicon Valley, which is also what happens when you tear down too many British people. Although you might argue that is another interesting thing, right? Entrepreneurs need thick skin. So there's like two sides to that argument, I suppose. But British press don't do a great job of encouraging entrepreneurs to build great businesses.
No, and growth is the agenda now, seemingly for our government, and yet
we only get growth from productive people.
Exactly right, and then there's a disconnect. It comes back to this, my view of reputation being in the wrong pot. Reputation is fundamentally linked to growth.
Yeah,
we see growth as a positive, and yet we see reputation as a negative. Wholly, in many ways.
If you were managing the reputation of Great Britain, what would your advice be?
I would, I found myself in a previous life doing just that for a while.
I was going to say, that's what we did.
I know, but I mean now.
And it was an interesting period.
It was a better period.
It was an interesting period because obviously we had the whole great campaign kind of, about to kick off. I was working with the Prime Minister who was excited and enthusiastic about getting out and selling the brand. Earlier, actually, when we were in opposition, one of the things I'm proudest of, actually, in that job was that we sort of reclaimed the Union Jack. Up until that point, it was the property of the BNP, and we took it back and we wrapped our conference in the Union Jack. A lot of people thought that was madness. If you remember, the Tory logo at that stage was a sort of tree. Well, I didn't think much of it, if I'm honest with you, but we turned the tree into a Union Jack tree. And we just smothered the place in the flag, and we were proud and loud about our ability to get out and sell the country. We put David on planes. We were very, very loud on front foot and got a lot of flack for it. A lot of people felt, even in the party, this is unseemly. Right? This is too American.
Yeah, it's not very British.
This is not what it is to be a British Prime Minister. You shouldn't be out selling. And I thought that was utter nonsense. Because how else do you grow? How else do we tell our own positive story in an increasingly competitive world? How else does David turn up at a G7 or at a G20 and sort of punch above his weight, which is what we have to do, if you are not out loud and selling, right? It's got to be done well, all right? And I think the great campaign is, which I was on the fringes of because it was most of the work that came was sort of pre-Olympics and after the time I'd left, but we'd certainly laid the ground for it. Brilliant piece of work that still lives now. How do we all feel when we arrive now at the airport when you still see those posters, right? Fantastic piece of marketing that's been copied all over the world as well, by the way. That's where I am. I would get out there and sell, and I'd love to see Keir Starmer doing that. Whether he wants to and B, is capable, I don't know.
When you're advising leaders from your company now, and maybe it's not crisis, but you were talking about the other parts of what you do, so sort of proactive reputation management.
Yes.
Like, what does that conversation look like? What are you trying to get them to push towards strategically?
Well, it's entirely led by their definition of their purpose. So it is reputation with purpose is the words that we use, right? And if we can't define the purpose, and this has happened in some conversations, it turns out that it's not actually purpose led at all. It's fame.
It's
right?
fame.
It's fame. I just want to get better known. Right, or in some cases you might stumble across someone who says, "I just want." Really, what they're saying is, "I just want recognition."
Right.
That's a different endeavour entirely, in my view, to what is proper reputation work. Once I have a definition of purpose, and we can then build a campaign towards.
What's a good example of a purposeful build? Because I'm trying to break down for the people watching about strategically how to build their reputation as time goes on. Like, what is a good goal?
Yeah. The reason I'm hesitating is because I want to give you some specifics and I don't talk about the client. So I can actually, AO is not a bad example. I've mentioned John already, so this is sort of safe territory. AO is a really interesting business, but what sits alongside AO is John Roberts as the founder and the chief exec of that business. And John is a philanthropist. He's the supporter of youth services in this country in a way that is meaningful, pretty epic, actually. He's in many ways, he'd probably hate me for saying this, I don't know. In many ways, he's reflective of the old school Victorian philanthropy, right? Particularly of the North, right? Where amazing work was done out of what was essentially the kind of factories of the north, and John has done that with AO, and so that actually is a key part of his purpose as a leader, and that has definitely connected with the business, served the business well, and I think AO is a business that people kind of feel good about. They've also got great marketing. AO Let's Go is a terrific bit of of a kind of straightforward marketing, and so John's managed to combine his purpose, with a commercial imperative, I suppose, in a very soft and very careful and very proper way. Net positive, in my view. So sorry, I have this. This is an interesting point for me as well, because it is, in the business that I run, I've set myself a number of interesting challenges. One of them is to never talk about the clients, which makes marketing quite difficult.
What if Dan, who's not your client currently, wanted a purposeful goal to aim at for his reputation?
Well, I'd need to spend time, work out actually what you're about.
He's great.
Why? I mean, what are you guys doing with this pod? What's the purpose of this pod? Seems pretty clear to me. Sharing very useful lessons for others who are thinking, or maybe in the midst of building their business. Right?
Yeah. Entertaining business show.
An entertaining business show, but that's the mission, though, right?
Yeah.
Is that
To be the most
in the end, what
entertaining
you're trying to do is drive useful lessons into people, as well as being entertaining, useful.
Yeah.
You can take a judgment as to whether or not this episode ticks the second box.
No, definitely.
I'll leave that to you.
We've got an amazing editor, Andy.
Yeah, that's good news.
He's got editoritis at the moment, so he's being a bit of a prick. But hey,
that's good news. That is good news.
Shout out to Alex.
What has been? I mean, look, the leaders that are actually thinking about going through some kind of, authentic transformation. Which commonly can happen either during your business or, in my experience, business to business. One business ends, I need to think about what I want to do next. And that is another moment in time, some space to think about, okay, don't need to just keep doing what I was doing. Who do I want to become? And how do I get myself through this authentic transformation? It still feels like me, but is an evolution of me into the place where I want to get to. What are some of your powerful lessons that people can take to think about how to do that?
I've had a situation with a client where they decided, as founder, they now and chief exec, they now really only wanted to be a founder, and so I need to find a new chief exec, and I need to put a new team in place. And
very common,
very very common,
very common,
and very complicated. Yeah, and treacherous territory.
Yeah.
Because
and full of a lot of fucking hope,
and it's about ego, it's about control, it's about that letting go, which is such a difficult thing to do if you've created something, and it's also about the hard graft of getting a talented team in place, and in a way that they're sort of there's a bit of synergy there, the ego bit is the bit that I've often found myself kind of involved in, is trying to get the leader to understand that making a decision like that really is about letting go. It is about letting go, and I feel it myself sometimes in my little business, because it's I'm a bit of a control freak, and trying to convince someone that is not only the right thing for the business but the right thing for them. You end up in counselling territory, really, in those kind of conversations, and I love that work, actually. But it is it's a difficult endeavour.
What makes a great leader?
Self-awareness, honesty, a bit of bravery, and I think also an understanding that no piece of good or bad news is as good or as bad as it first appears.
What makes a bad leader?
Dishonesty, thin skin, ego, and a natural instinct to transmit more than receive.
Amazing. Andy Coulson, thank you so much for joining us on Secret Leaders.
Thanks for having me, guys.